Anjali Sud, the daughter of Indian immigrants, Sud grew up in Flint, Michigan, where her father runs a plastics recycling plant. She became the CEO of Vimeo, part of Barry Diller's IAC, at age 33 and led the company's IPO in 2022. The next year, Sud left to take the helm at streaming platform Tubi, owned by Fox. In her first year, Sud grew Tubi to more than 80 million U.S. monthly active users, forging relationships with brands and creators. As of January, Tubi has grown to more than 97 million monthly active users and boasts 10 billion hours of streamed content. Anjali Sud is in the Changemakers spotlight.
Anjali, thank you so much for being here with us. You were named a 2025 CNBC Changemaker for how you've accelerated Tubi's growth. You've built relationships with brands, with creators, and you have really established Tubi as the dominant leader in the free ad-supported streaming space. And this is an increasingly crowded space. What made you want to take on this challenge?
I think I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time thinking about creators. I spent almost a decade at Vimeo really trying to help creators get their stories out there. And one of the biggest challenges that I saw during that time is really helping creators find their audience. And I got really excited about Tubi because I really believe the future of entertainment is going to be free for consumers. And I believe that there is a lot more diversity in storytelling and in what audiences' tastes are than what's reflected in the traditional Hollywood system today. And so Tubi has really spent over a decade trying to break the monoculture, if you will, and just platform more stories and really embrace the fact that people have a lot of different interests and tastes. And so, for me, I think Tubi is helping every story find its audience. And we're trying to democratize a lot of aspects of entertainment. And I just think that's where the future is headed. That's what young people in particular are going to gravitate to. And whenever you're looking at an industry that's potentially going through change and disruption, there's always opportunity. And I just got a lot of conviction that Tubi has the ingredients to help shape that future.
And so you're really doubling down on this idea of diversifying the content out there, making it available to everyone.
Yeah, so we have nearly 100 million monthly active users, and the vast majority are not subscribing to cable. Over half of our audience identify as multicultural. It's a younger audience. And when we look at the type of content and stories that they're gravitating to, it sometimes might surprise people. And it just shows me, if you think about, we live in an attention economy, how are people spending their time and being entertained? It used to be that everyone in America would tune in at 8 p.m. to watch one show, right? And that show had to speak to everybody. And now all of our entertainment and content is on demand, or it's on social, on TikTok as we scroll. And I think that's just fundamentally changing the way that that people are entertained. And it also means there's a huge opportunity for many more creators and storytellers to actually get their content out there.
You're driving this change at Tubi, but before that, as you mentioned, you were at Vimeo, and you led Vimeo to an IPO spinning off from Barry Diller's IAC. And what was so interesting to me about your time at Vimeo is you decided not to try to compete with Netflix or YouTube, and instead leaned into being the leader in the video software space. What made you go in that direction as opposed to trying to compete with the giants?
I think first you have to know your strengths, and you have to believe that you're embarking on a strategy where you have the right to win. And I think in that world, it didn't feel like Vimeo would be able to compete with Netflix or YouTube at that game. At the same time, what I saw and what many people saw at the company was that there was a real need for creators and a broadening of the types of creators. And really what we were seeing is that a lot of marketers, a lot of businesses were starting to create video for the first time, and they needed tools and they needed a platform that would help serve them. And now it almost feels obvious because we live in a video first world. But I remember, trying to convince people before the pandemic that companies would live stream their town halls. And that felt, we would just be told no over and over again. And you literally look over the last few years at how much we all use video now in our work and in business and to reach customers and serve customers. And obviously with AI, that's going to accelerate even further. So I think we did hone in on sort of a ability to see where the future was going in video. And then we built a strategy that allowed us to build on that strength and I think offer a great product.
What did you learn through that experience about when you have a shot at competition and when you should go in a different direction?
I think it's really important not to let competition drive your strategy. It has to be rooted in a fundamental listening and understanding of your customer and the problem that you're trying to solve and their needs. And it has to be, you have to have strong conviction that you can build a product that serves those needs better than everybody else. And I think every strategy that wins in business has some element of that. Your competition, I think, is sort of it's your mirror, right? It helps you assess where you're going to lean into a strength, where you're going to differentiate, what you're not going to do. And so I do think it's important to understand the market around you. It's important to look at competition, but I always say this, I say this at Tubi too, we're in a really competitive market, but we don't do things because others are doing them. That's never a good reason. It's got to be because we believe it's helping our audiences, it's helping the creators, and it's helping build a great business. And that's really been a compass that's, I think, helped me navigate sometimes a lot of tough decisions.
So understanding your competition, but not being defined by it.
Yeah.
When you were at Vimeo, you talked about how you tried to bring some of your experiences and some of the values from Amazon, your prior job, with you. What are those Amazon values that you brought to Vimeo, and have you also brought them to Tubi?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was really fortunate to be at Amazon during a time when e-commerce was really scaling, and learned a lot. And for sure, I think talk about customers. Putting customer first is obviously a core principle at Amazon. And there were a lot of mechanisms at Amazon that I took from Amazon around how to do that. Start with the sort of, when you're launching a new product, start with the press release of what you're actually going to put out there to customers, and then work backwards. That's a really good one. Ask the 5 whys. Sort of obsessively, when you're trying to understand why something is happening, don't just stop at the surface answer. Keep going. And I think probably the one that I've really embraced in sort of every job has been disagree and commit, which is really just like building a culture where internally you can debate and you can welcome and actually encourage dissenting views and opinions, all in pursuit of getting to the right answer. And once you then decide, everybody rallies. I have found that to be so impactful, because usually if you're trying to innovate and disrupt in an industry, there's no playbook. There's no obvious answer. And so if you're not building a culture where you internally are really, really kind of fighting it out a little bit to get to that right answer, then your track record just won't be as strong.
Yeah, amazing to think about the power and that conviction. You also had the experience of working very closely with Barry Diller when you were at Vimeo. What did you learn from working with him? He is a legend.
He is a legend. I think probably if I were to describe the experience, it was like being thrown into the deep end of the pool and learning to swim. And I say that because in the most positive way. I think that was really the philosophy that Barry and his protege Joey Levin and everyone at IAC had, which was this belief that you bet on talent over experience, and you give people opportunities, but you also kind of leave it to them to figure it out. And that was very much the ethos, and I think for me it was like such a wonderful place to learn. The other thing that I always take with me from that time was this sort of philosophy of being impatient on execution and patient on vision, and the ability to do those two things at the same time. So be high sense of urgency, constantly driving forward on the day-to-day of how we execute, but when it comes to the vision, understanding that great businesses are built over a long time, and you have to be patient, and you can't give up the second that something doesn't go well. You can't hedge, when it comes to your actual vision. I think Barry and IAC did that really well, and it's something that I've definitely carried with me.
It's interesting because Barry Diller was given a huge amount of responsibility at a very young age, then gave you a huge amount of responsibility at a very young age. Given that experience, what advice would you give to young people as they think about managing their careers?
Oh, so I have so much advice and lessons learned, but I will say first one thing, which is to your point, that philosophy definitely cascades. And I think about the opportunity I was given at 33 years old to run a global video platform. And then, of course, it made me want to reach out and have people on my team who were also given that opportunity. And there's examples of women on my team who have now gone on and become 2-time CEOs in their own right. And so it does cascade. And so I think it is important for young people, when you're ambitious, pay attention to the people above you and what their journeys are, and try and put yourself in a position where you're working at a company that has that culture and has that philosophy, because it will make things so much easier. The other piece of advice I would give to young people is just be yourself. I think in the end, authenticity wins. And I spent so much time when I was younger, so much energy was wasted on trying to show up as a certain kind of leader or contort myself to be what I thought everybody would want me to be. And I wish I had just taken all that energy and just focused it on my job.
When did you learn not to contort yourself?
Honestly, it didn't happen until I became CEO. And I found myself in a position suddenly to have the privilege to kind of be yourself. And I think, scaling Vimeo and taking it public and doing that, having kids at the same time and just going through all of that, it's sort of, I didn't have a choice. I had to kind of be myself to get through it. And I think what I learned, though, was that, as leaders, what people, they will believe in you and trust in you if you believe in yourself and you trust in yourself and you keep it real with them. And people don't want, they don't want to follow and rally behind leaders that aren't authentic. And I think more so today even than before, I think authenticity is going to be more and more important. So I think the good news is I do believe that leadership can look in many, many different forms, and it really does come down to just trusting yourself and being comfortable.
Did you ever feel intimidated or imposter syndrome? And what's your advice to get over it?
I have always felt imposter syndrome. I feel it every day. I feel it right now in this interview. And I think for me, I've really reframed that. Like, I don't think you can get over imposter syndrome. I think the key is, how do you take that piece of you that's like, this is hard, it's challenging, it's scary, and build a fearlessness around it and embrace that feeling and use it to push yourself forward. And it's sort of a mantra for me that has guided a lot of my decisions is like, look, the world and life will put plenty of limits on you. So like, don't you dare limit yourself. And so it's okay if it's gonna be scary. Of course it is. And you just kind of bring it on and you go for it.
My parents always used to tell me that feeling you're feeling, it's not nervousness, it's excitement.
Yeah, so, yeah. And everybody feels it at every level all the time. And I think it's just something that we have to almost, instead of getting over, we have to kind of just embrace.
You've talked even today just about this idea of pushing forward. Have there been specific setbacks that you still think about that shape the way that you lead and run your business?
I think certainly experiencing failure in some way, shape, or form early in life has been the most formative. I think probably the hardest year of my life was when I was 14 years old, and I left home, and I was in a new school, and I was just like failing miserably and homesick, and it was just a very hard year. And it's so funny because even today, whenever I have a hard business problem or I'm entering a situation, I think to myself, I think about 14-year-old Anjali, and she could do that, like I can do this. So I think in some ways the biggest gift is when you go through challenges and sometimes don't succeed, and you kind of build a little bit of that grit and muscle that makes you, instead of running away from something when it's hard, that you're running towards it. And in business, I've certainly had ups and downs. And at Vimeo, I had some of the highest highs, and I also had really tough time on the public markets. And I do think what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and it's my job to learn from that and use those lessons to just build better, stronger businesses.
You mentioned this idea of being able to have disagreements at work, and this idea of being able to have these clashes and then come to a conclusion through that. How do you think about creating an environment where you can talk about failures, where you can disagree, and where that's all part of the process?
I think it starts at the top. I think it's really important to, first for me, it's important that I surround myself with a team of people who will disagree with me and who are comfortable telling me when they think I'm wrong. And then I think you do that in front of a lot of other people, and it starts to build a culture where people see that you're not going to get punished for saying, speaking up and saying your mind. There's also a lot of frameworks that we use. We at Tubi, one of our values is swing big, and we celebrate when we swing big, and we celebrate the times when that leads to failure.
But how do you do that? If it leads to failure, what are you celebrating?
I mean, we often start, I start all of our all hands with, here's what's working and here's what's not working. And whenever we talk about what's working, we also talk about what's not working. And I think, it isn't like, that's how business works. It's never always up and to the right. There's always things that go wrong. And it's more about how are you going to take the things that aren't working and move them into the what's working column, and what do we have to do that? So, and I'll give you an example. Just a few months ago, Tubi delivered the most streamed Super Bowl in history. And we live streamed America's biggest cultural event, and we had never done a live event at scale before. And that's hugely risky. Hugely risky, yeah.
0 to 60.
0 to 60. And you have a team that's working their butts off to make that happen, but we're sitting there faced with a very real risk of failure. And I think we were just very open from day one, like this, we can't guarantee that this will go great, but what we can do is prepare. We can go above and beyond in a variety of very specific ways, and we all hold hands and we live with kind of what happens coming out of it. And of course, in this specific example, it went wonderfully, and we were able to deliver a best-in-class free experience for millions of Americans. But I mean, up until literally like the halftime show, we didn't know that was going to be the case. And so I do think that as a company, you have to be willing to swing big, and you have to acknowledge that there can be failure. And when it happens, because it will, you have to talk about it and turn it into a powerful lesson to be better.
You've worked at some huge corporations. You mentioned Amazon. Now Tubi is part of Fox. Vimeo started off as part of IAC. Within these big systems, how do you maintain an attitude and an approach of entrepreneurship and innovation?
I've actually been really fortunate, I think, to work at companies where we have been able to be entrepreneurial. In fact, Tubi, is probably the most entrepreneurial environment I've been in. We have made a lot of changes, fast decision making, and I do think that you can be entrepreneurial in big companies. It's not easy, but usually what I found is it starts with a real clarity of vision. You have to, internally, you have to be so sure that this is the direction we want to go in, and you have to be the champion. And you have to be willing to bet your own career on, what you're saying you think you should do, and then rally people around you. And that is infectious. And I think even for large companies, even for big public companies that are balancing a lot of different things, people generally at the top will bet on people who will bet on themselves.
The people who work for you say that you're really good at trusting your gut on where to invest and where to build. How do you identify what your gut is telling you and learn to trust it?
For me, I think the perfect kind of marriage of inputs are, being able to see something in the data, in the trends, and just really clinically being able to analyze something that's happening in a business or in a market, because that just makes it easier to trust your instincts when there's something tangible. But that's never in isolation. Always also with just actually speaking to and talking to your customer. And just the instinctual part of decision making does come from that. It's like recognizing that whether we're selling software or we're making movies, our customer, our end user, they're real human beings that have real opinions and feelings. And as a leader, you need to get in there and really speak to people and listen to them. And with a very open mind, and try and build that empathy. And everyone always says that, and it sounds really fundamentally basic, and it is, But I have always found like where I get conviction, where I can trust my instincts is when I have the marriage of those two things. There's like some trend and it's married with like real people expressing what they need, and I can kind of see those two things coming together.
You also have a reputation for being really good at distilling complex ecosystems. You talk about the video creator ecosystem, now you're dealing with ad-supported streaming and a new generation of creators. How are you able to do that? Is it by talking to so many people that you're connecting with the individual trees to see the forest? Where does that come from?
It actually is. It's exactly right. Like I think, sometimes, and look, I'm an MBA, like it can be easy to get into like MBA speak or corporate speak, or you start to like let the slides drive the thinking. And it's incredibly clarifying and grounding when you just talk to people. Because if you have to explain your strategy to someone who's just, walking down the street, suddenly it's very humbling. You start to realize like, wait a minute, I'm inside my own tent too much. I'm not understanding like what is actually happening from the lens of like, just an everyday person, just why should they care? And I do think that it helps you to simplify and crystallize your own thinking, which then of course enables you to be a better communicator. So yeah, I mean, and it's a skill set that I'm constantly working at getting better at, but the best part of it is that I think that pushing yourself to communicate more clearly actually clarifies your thinking, which clarifies your strategy.
And how are you doing this? Focus groups?
I mean, so it's really interesting. There's an article that came out this morning, I think it was Marketing Brew, they picked up on Tubi's strategy for fan outreach. So our teams, we're on social media all the time. We literally will go out and like someone will be like a fan of a Tubi movie and we will send them like a bespoke care package. And we actually do a lot to just listen and understand our fans. And one of the reasons I took the job at Tubi was, of course I had a thesis on the market, but I literally just went on to Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and just went deep and read all the comments and heard what people were saying. And because, we're in the entertainment business, it's about culture, it's about how we delight audiences, and there was no other way for me to really understand, like, what is Tubi doing that's special? And I can tell you, we do focus groups, we do all those like standard things. But I have found social media to be one of the most powerful signals, and it's helped me understand that like the real value we're offering is that we're helping a lot of underestimated audiences feel seen. And that, if you just think about that insight, you're not going to get that from research. You're not going to get that from a chart. You have to just get in there with your customers.
And hear what they're saying. So much of your business is trying to figure out where this whole industry is going. You made your personal bet on ad-supported streaming. Fox, your parent company, recently purchased Red Seat Ventures, which is the company behind a number of former Fox names, including Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly, building their direct-to-consumer content. How will that fit into your business, and where do you see all of Tubi's content relationships?
Yeah, I think, well, first I'll say Tubi, and it's a credit to Fox, is they've really enabled Tubi and many of their businesses to run entrepreneurially. And like, we don't, there's no, we're acquiring this company now, your strategy changes or anything like that. I do believe that creator economy is a big tailwind for streaming, for free ad-supported streaming, and for Tubi. And I think whether that's, Red Seat Ventures is podcasting, Tubi hasn't gone into that area. But I do think there's an equivalent version of that in movies and TV series, which is there are a lot of creators, there are a lot of independent filmmakers, there are a lot of digitally native storytellers, and they are looking to get to Hollywood. And that's the angle that I think is most compelling for Tubi. We actually launched last year the first fan-fueled studio in streaming, and we did it in partnership with Issa Rae, who is a great example of someone who started on YouTube and then moved into Hollywood. That is, I think, where Tubi can really make an impact. I think we have the ability to help many more creators eventually kind of graduate into Hollywood, and you will see, I think, more from us in that space. And it's really very core to our belief of we want to democratize storytelling.
So really driving that crossover from the creator economy to the traditional media economy.
Yeah, because I don't think that's been done yet. And probably YouTube has come the farthest, But even then, it's very hard to take the kind of content that does really well on social media and then enable those creators with the tools, the resources, the know-how to be able to go and do Hollywood quality produced content. And what we are hearing from our audiences is they want that. They want that nexus of like culturally relevant. They want to see the talent that they see on their phones on the big screen. And so, I think that's a great example of a challenge that we'll embark upon. And I think with the support of Fox, we'll be very well equipped to be successful.
So shifting from the professional to the personal, you have kids, you do a ton of travel, you're here in Los Angeles, your family's in New York. How do you prevent your own burnout?
I'm sure you appreciate this as well, Julia. It's a constant struggle, and I think I always say your job as a CEO is in some ways is to be like a capital allocator, and there's no better capital allocator, no one who's better equipped to like manage scarce resources than a working mother, because you just have no room. And so, I think for me, what I've found is like I've just gotten way more efficient. My bar for what is worth doing in every aspect of my life kind of gets higher and higher. And you do the best that you can. And I will say for me, the biggest thing that has helped me navigate this sort of struggle is just having passion and enjoying what I do. And I think it's made me just much more open to, I only want to do things that I think are going to make a difference. I want to do things that I think have a positive impact in the world. And if I can get that additional feeling, then everything else is worth it, and you work it out.
So do you have any tips of how to structure your time or how you're structuring your own time to make all that possible?
So my big life hack is sleep. So I try and get 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and I have been doing that for a decade, including having kids and through my career, which many people will say, how on earth do you do that? And for sure, I have a lot of support at home that enables me to do that. But I also am just that I take the trade-offs. So if it's between working out or watching a show, I choose sleep every single time. It definitely took a hit to my social life, but for me, I feel like when I can show up at work with passion and energy, I'm at my very best, and I can enable the best in others, and sleep has been my way to do that.
Sleep is your superpower. So what's the best advice you've ever gotten in your career?
Always stay out of your comfort zone. And I think my dad actually gave me that advice when I was younger, and the reason that has guided me so much is because it does make you, it turns you from a place of being like, oh, I want to stay away from things that are uncomfortable, to being more fearless. It's about continuous improvement. It's about never being complacent. And I feel like that is what has propelled me. And I hope that every day of my life, I will constantly feel like I'm pushing out of my comfort zone.
How did your family shape you?
I mean, they've shaped me entirely. My parents are immigrants that came to this country to give me and my sister and brother like a shot at the American dream, and a very classic kind of immigrant story. And from the time I was a little kid, they believed in me. My dad used to he would take these clips of like articles from CEOs from the Wall Street Journal and like lay them on my pillow when I was 10 years old, which, you might say that's, that's a bit aggressive, but it's, what I grew up with was parents who believed that I could be a person on, that clip. And when you have that and you have that belief and support, it just, it propels you. So I'm very fortunate. I always say my family are my biggest mentors and advisors. Anytime I have a really tough question or challenge, I go to them first, and they've really helped guide me through my life.
And seeing them navigate that American dream has put you here.
I feel really privileged and lucky that I feel like I did get to achieve my version of the American dream, and I think the real thing that I think about now is how do we ensure that happens for many more people, including many more women in corporate America. And you know, I think there's a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic, particularly with programs like Changemakers.
Thank you. Just a final question. Is there one thing that you know now that you wish you had known earlier in your career?
Nobody's got to figure it out. Nobody. I think I would always look up at people and be like, they have all the answers, you know, and I don't. And now I just realize everybody's trying their best based on the information that they have, and nobody's perfect, and everyone's got imposter syndrome. And so bet on yourself, and you have just as much a chance as anybody else as to be able to make an impact.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on as we all try to figure it out together. Anjali Sud, CEO of Tubi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.